Have you ever felt trapped by something that seems right, but deep down you sense it isn't? Maybe you entered a place seeking answers, but left with more doubts and an unexplained weight. This feeling that something doesn't fit could be a sign. In today's video, we're going to talk about churches that appear to be sanctuaries, but actually hide practices that divert people from their true purpose. I'll show you how these churches operate, the strategies they use to control, and how you can free yourself from this system. And I need you to stay until the end, because the last church presents a special challenge, something that few can accomplish. Are you ready to face the truth and change your perspective once and for all? If you've ever felt that something was wrong, if you've noticed that your faith was being used as currency, or if you have doubts about what the true message really is, this video is for you. Today, we'll walk together to uncover the deceptions and find a path of truth. Imagine entering a place where everything seems holy, yet something doesn't make sense. This church builds its space with messages full of comforting words, promises of healing and prosperity, and an emotionally charged environment. What you don't see, however, is the system behind it all. Here, people are attracted by the idea that they can find quick answers and solutions to their problems. The message is simple: just be part of this system, and you will be rewarded with blessings. But these blessings never come for free. There's always a condition, something that demands financial sacrifices or actions that aren't part of what true faith should mean. In this church, there's a very dangerous practice: dependence on the leaders. They are the ones who dictate what is right and wrong, what should or shouldn't be done. People stop having a genuine connection with God and instead depend on human words and promises, believing that only through these leaders can they achieve divine grace. And you know what makes this even more disturbing? It's the way these leaders manipulate the faithful. They use biblical stories in a distorted manner, creating an environment of fear. Any attempt to question or leave this structure is seen as an act of rebellion against God, something that carries the threat of curses or losses. But what really happens behind these doors? Endless financial campaigns where faith is placed as a currency of exchange. It's always necessary to give something to receive something, as if God's love were conditioned on numbers or values. This not only hurts the essence of the gospel, but also emotionally exploits people who are already vulnerable. And here's an important reflection: is this really how God operates? Would He condition His love and mercy on something so material? Or are we facing a system that uses the appearance of holiness to manipulate and control? While you think about that, remember, this church doesn't act in isolation. It has branches, different methods of attracting and deceiving. And that's what we'll explore in the upcoming parts. After everything we've discussed about the church that uses the appearance of holiness to divert focus from true faith, you might be wondering, how does this connect with what we're living today? The answer lies in the strategies that continue to be used to manipulate and exploit. And to help you understand even more, I've prepared something special. I've made available a complete material where I show how these practices spread and how you can identify them. The link is in the first pinned comment. It's free and might be exactly what you need to finally open your eyes and find the truth. Now let's delve into something even deeper. The next church has a method that directly touches the desire for prosperity and achievements, but hides something that many people don't even imagine. If you found what we've discussed so far impactful, what comes next will surprise you even more. Now, let's move to another point that is part of this well-crafted structure. This church not only uses the appearance of holiness as a disguise, but also builds its entire message around promises of prosperity. It sounds tempting, doesn't it? You arrive there, hear about miracles, financial victories, and achievements that seem within your grasp. But what's really happening? Here, people are enveloped by carefully crafted speeches. The central idea is that if you do enough, whether donating, participating in campaigns, or fulfilling specific rituals, you will be rewarded. And these rewards aren't small. They are promises of incredible jobs, unexpected fortunes, and even miraculous healings. But there's a question that needs to be asked. Where does all this come from? The truth is that these promises come at a cost, and this cost is often more emotional and financial than spiritual. The connection with the divine, which should be based on trust and love, turns into a transactional relationship. It's no longer about seeking God sincerely, but about doing something to earn what was promised. This church uses very specific strategies to reinforce this idea. First, it focuses on success stories. Testimonials are presented everywhere, in front of thousands of people, on television, on social media. What they don't tell you is that often these stories are carefully selected or even manipulated to keep the idea that this system works alive. Then comes the pressure. Phrases like, "You're not receiving because you're not giving enough," or "Your faith needs to be tested," are common. This creates a cycle of guilt and obligation. People who don't see the promises fulfilled start to think they're failing in some way, and the solution presented is always the same: more campaigns, more donations, more involvement. And you know what's even more worrying? Many who enter this system end up losing much more than they imagine. Families that part with their belongings, that sacrifice entire savings, all in the hope that God will reward them for it. When that doesn't happen, despair takes over. Now think with me. Would God, who loves us so deeply, need us to pay for his help? The Bible teaches that he offers us grace and blessings without price. So why are these conditions imposed? What's most serious is that while people suffer, the leaders of this system prosper. They live in luxurious homes, drive expensive cars, and flaunt a lifestyle that completely contrasts with the simplicity and humility taught by Christ. This isn't just contradictory. It's a betrayal of what a church should be about. If this point made you think about what lies behind this facade of prosperity, you are on the right path. Let's delve even deeper into the next point to understand how these strategies unfold. Now we enter an even more delicate point. Have you ever stopped to notice how, in certain places, faith has turned into a kind of commerce? Here, the message is clear. To access God's blessings, you need to plant something. But what does that really mean? That's when we begin to see a worrying pattern. This church has transformed what should be a space of spirituality into an organized marketplace. Everything seems to revolve around financial campaigns that promise almost magical results. You hear about oils, anointed objects, healing waters, roses that carry divine promises. And the most disturbing part, all of this comes at a price. The strategy is simple. First, they create an environment where emotions are heightened to the maximum. Music, powerful sermons, and impactful testimonies are used to make you believe you're in the right place. But the message that follows is the real problem. If you want your healing, your blessing, or the fulfillment of a dream, you need to give something in return. Here, exploitation happens almost invisibly. They don't ask outright but suggest manipulating emotions. People, often desperate, end up feeling pressured to give. After all, who wouldn't do anything to save a loved one or solve a situation that seems impossible? The cruelest part is how this manipulation targets those already in difficult situations. Many people are going through serious problems: unemployment, illnesses, family crises. They arrive believing they've found a refuge, but end up falling into a system that exploits them. And the cycle continues. They give what they have and what they don't have, always hoping that the next campaign will be the answer. And the leaders? They don't just allow this, they encourage it. And while people give up what they have, these leaders accumulate wealth. You see them in large temples, living a luxurious life, while most people leave even more fragile than when they arrived. And it doesn't stop there. There are also promises tied to objects. They claim these items carry special power, that they can change your life, but only if you invest in them. The problem is that this completely distorts what faith truly represents. It's hard to understand how something so sacred can be used this way. And perhaps you're thinking, is all of this really necessary? Does God really ask for this kind of sacrifice? The answer is in the Bible. His blessings are a gift, not something you need to buy. What this church does is create a cycle of dependence and exploitation, where faith is used as a tool for profit. The true spiritual purpose is set aside, while people are led to believe they need to give more and more to achieve something that, in reality, is already free. If this description made you think, it's because we're already getting to the heart of the matter. Let's continue showing how these systems work so you can see beyond appearances. So what did you think of the first 3 churches we've discussed so far? Have any of these manipulation strategies been part of your life or someone you know? Leave a comment, because I want to hear your experience. But we're not done yet. What comes next is even more impactful. We're going to delve into a subject that will make you see something that happens before many people, but that almost no one notices. It's about how spectacle can be used to deceive, divert, and manipulate in a frightening way. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear in the next part might open your eyes in a way you never imagined. Now let's talk about something that grabs attention at first glance. Have you ever seen or heard of public exorcisms where the scene is marked by screams, exaggerated movements, and an attentive audience? It seems impressive, almost supernatural. But does it reflect the true spiritual battle? In this church, what should be an intimate and sacred moment becomes a real spectacle. What happens there is carefully staged to capture the attention of those watching. The goal is not just to expel evil, but to reinforce the idea that that environment, and especially those leaders, are indispensable for your spiritual protection. People who participate in these events are often fragile. They arrive carrying emotional burdens, problems that seem impossible to solve, and there, in the midst of a high-energy service, they are led to believe that their liberation depends exclusively on that place. The scene is powerful. A leader positions themselves as a central figure, invoking words of authority and apparently winning battles against evil in a public and theatrical manner. But what's behind this? To start, public exposure. These moments aren't done privately, like Jesus did in his walk. On the contrary, they are promoted before crowds, almost as if they were a performance. The focus isn't on the person seeking help, but on showcasing the supposed power. This creates an environment of emotional dependence. People begin to believe that without that leader or that place, they are vulnerable to evil. This strategy is designed to generate submission and loyalty to the church. After all, if you believe that only there are you protected, you will hardly seek another path. What's most concerning is how these practices distort true spirituality. They give stage to fear. Instead of showing that the spiritual fight is something intimate that depends on faith and prayer, they reinforce the idea that you need to follow specific rules, participate in services, and even make donations to be protected. This completely diverts the focus from what should be a direct and true relationship with God. And there's something even more disturbing. Many people who go through these public exorcisms report that their problems continue. This happens because they are not taught to seek true transformation, to trust in God, and to change their attitudes. Instead, they are encouraged to always return to the same system, as if the solution depends exclusively on it. The truth is that spiritual authority doesn't need stages, spotlights, or crowds. Jesus never made a spectacle. He cared for people with respect and serenity, focusing on true healing, which is internal. What these churches do is divert the focus, creating a theater where the main purpose is to reaffirm the power and indispensability of their leaders. Now let's address an even more delicate aspect: the use of fear as a tool of control. Imagine being constantly reminded that if you don't follow certain rules or do what is asked, something bad will happen to you or your family. It is in this climate of emotional threat that many people end up trapped. This church builds an environment where fear becomes a method of manipulation. These are messages that at first glance seem like spiritual warnings, but carry a heavy emotional load. The leaders say that if you don't participate in campaigns, don't make specific donations, or don't follow the imposed directions, you will be subject to curses. These words are carefully chosen to provoke anguish. Phrases like, "Your health will be affected," "Your family may suffer," or "You will face financial problems," are frequently used. The goal is clear: to create a state of panic that leads people to act without questioning. And it works. Fear is a powerful emotion. It paralyzes, blinds, and makes you make impulsive decisions. And it is precisely in this state of vulnerability that many people find themselves when they accept these impositions. They begin to believe that they have no other choice, that they need to obey or pay a very high price. The cruelest part is that this manipulation deeply affects the emotional and psychological well-being. Faith, which should be a path of tranquility, turns into a constant worry. People start living in a cycle of guilt, believing that any difficulty they face is the result of their disobedience. These practices create a type of emotional and spiritual dependency. It's as if the faithful become hostages of a system that dictates rules without offering freedom. And this invisible prison is what keeps so many people trapped, even when something inside them says that something is wrong. Meanwhile, what happens behind the scenes? The leaders who disseminate these messages of fear live comfortable lives, immune to the same threats they preach. They accumulate power and wealth while placing on their followers the burden of keeping the system running. But let's think together. Does God really want you to live in fear? Would He impose such severe conditions to bless you? The answer, once again, is in the Bible. It teaches that God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and balance. These panic messages, besides being wrong, divert the focus from what is essential. They transform faith into a transactional relationship based on insecurity, when it should be a path of trust and surrender. If you've already felt this weight, know that you are not alone. Many people live under this type of control, but there is a way out, and that is exactly what we want to show. How to open your eyes to this manipulation and find a more truthful path. After everything we've discussed about the use of fear to control and manipulate, you might be wondering, how can you identify when this is happening in your own life or in someone close to you? The answer requires courage and the willingness to question what many accept without thinking. And to help you even more, I have prepared exclusive material that you can access in the first pinned comment. It will help you understand how these systems operate and how you can break free from this cycle of manipulation. Don't leave it for later. Access it right now before the links are removed. Now, let's move to an even deeper point. It's time to talk about how the true message of the Bible is being diverted and how superficial practices have distanced many people from a direct relationship with God. We have reached a crucial point. Imagine a church that should lead you to God but instead puts up barriers. It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But that is exactly what happens when the focus is on human intermediaries and rituals, rather than on a direct and sincere relationship with the Creator. In this system, the spiritual connection is constantly diverted to leaders who present themselves as indispensable mediators. You are not encouraged to seek God directly. Instead, you need someone to interpret, bless, or intercede for you. And with that, the true essence of faith ends up being obscured. The Bible teaches us that there is only one mediator between God and men, Jesus Christ. But here what we see is a system that inverts this logic. People or objects are placed at the center, assuming a role that was never given to them. They promise that you need certain rituals, gestures, or even specific items to get closer to God. All of this goes against the simplicity and depth of the original message. This church also does something even more troubling. It turns worship into a set of repetitive and superficial practices. Services, instead of being moments of reflection and spirituality, become almost mechanical. People are instructed to follow rules, perform gestures, recite phrases, but rarely to question or think about what they are experiencing. And what happens to those who try to go beyond that? Usually, these people are discouraged. Those who seek a deeper understanding of the Bible or try to develop a direct relationship with God are seen as someone who does not understand the system. It is a subtle way of diverting people from the truth, keeping them dependent on the church's structure. And here is the big question: how does this impact faith? For many people, spirituality becomes a burden. Instead of finding peace, they feel they need to do more and more to please God. They begin to see the church as an entity that regulates their relationship with the divine, rather than as a space for support and spiritual growth. All of this ends up creating an emotional and spiritual barrier. People cannot perceive that God is accessible to everyone, without intermediaries, without conditions. He does not demand complex rituals or empty practices. He wants an open heart, willing to listen and trust. And meanwhile, the church structure prospers. It benefits from the dependency it creates, while the true message of the gospel is sidelined. This inversion of values is what makes everything so devastating. Faith, which should be a foundation of hope, becomes a tool of control. Now think with me, does your relationship with God need so many layers? Or is He simply waiting for you, with nothing in between, no complications? True faith is not about rituals, but about a sincere and personal connection. We have reached the most important moment. After everything we have seen, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? It is not enough to know that these systems exist and manipulate people. Change begins when you decide to step out of passivity and take real action. The first step is to seek the truth at the source. This means opening the Bible and reading it on your own, not to find what you want to hear, but to understand what God really has to say. Often, we become dependent on others' interpretations and stop seeking divine wisdom directly. And you know what happens when you do this? The layers of deception begin to unravel. You start to realize that God is not asking for financial campaigns, anointed objects, or human intermediaries. He just wants your sincerity. But seeking the truth requires courage. Often this means distancing yourself from places you've frequented for years, from practices that were taught as essential. Breaking away from corrupt religious systems can be scary, but it is also liberating.